Hi, my name's Mary May. I'm the Director for Data for Impact at UNAIDS in Geneva, and I'm going to give a presentation now on setting targets for long-acting injectable PrEP, so focusing on LEN here. Right now at the global level, we're just in the process of finalizing the global AIDS strategy for 2026 to 2031. In that strategy, we're recommending a set of targets that will help us get to the end of AIDS by 2030. What you can see in this graph already is a nice declining new infections as we got to the end of 2024, but then in 2025 we lost a lot of our funding, and so we've got a number of different scenarios that might go forward given this funding loss. What's important though is to look at what those targets are and figure out how we can reach those targets. And of course some of them will affect what we're talking about right now on lenacapavir. We have already, the ultimate goal is to get to a reduction of 90% reduction in new infections from our 2010 levels. We also have a focus on viral load suppression, so 95 treatment and testing and treatment targets, but also 90% viral suppression among people living with HIV. That will be really important to reach if we're going to end AIDS by 2030. We also have a target on people in need of prevention. And that's really about making sure that they're using prevention options. And so when we look at these targets over here, one is a situation, the first one there, the highest one, would actually result in increasing new infections over the coming 5 years if we reduce our prevention aspirations, if we reduce those targets. If we stay at 2024 levels, it just stays very flat there. If we keep pushing towards reducing or increasing our treatment services, we'll see that nice decline. But what's really important is looking at this last orange line, and that's meeting our 2030 targets, including this prevention targets as well as some of the societal enabler targets. That's what we need to push countries to achieve, which includes this 90% of people using prevention services. Within that is a target on PrEP that we hope all countries will adopt to end the AIDS epidemic. So when we think about long-acting injectable PrEP as part of an effective prevention, we need to make sure we're thinking of it as part of an effective prevention method mix. So that optimal mix needs to recognize that we should be addressing the right populations, the right places where those services will exist, the right packages of services, and on the right platforms. And of course, we need to come back to prices always of the commodities that are required for those services. We need to move away from a single tool approach to something that's more sustainable for a full prevention system. So we can't just talk about lenacapavir here. We need to be talking about what are the options, including condoms, VMMC, behavior change, etc., to make sure that we've got the right prevention tools in place. From 2026 onwards, within the annual UNAIDS HIV estimates process, we'll be supporting countries to produce a set of routine needs estimates for prevention options. That will help countries identify the denominators of how many people they need to reach with those different commodities. Lenacapavir, of course, sits within that, and that's a very unique opportunity to really push down new infections with the benefits of lenacapavir and the long-term consistency of having 6 months of uninterrupted prevention. It's essential to add that to the package, but it needs to be optimally integrated. These concepts that I'm talking to here come from a new prevention framework that the Global Prevention Coalition is about to put out, so look for that in the future. In all of this, we're thinking of a way of looking at maximizing the impact of prevention, and we can start with looking at first the geographic locations and whether the different situations or what the incidence is in those situations. And as incidence increases, we need to be pushing up the coverage of our prevention services. So the targeted coverage of what we hope to achieve in terms of making sure people are receiving PrEP or that they're using condoms would go up as we get to the higher incidence. But equally important is as we're at the lower level of incidence is that we're focusing on the individuals within those populations, making sure the highest risk individuals are receiving those services that best meet their needs. So this concept of adjusting and going on a sliding scale based on the incidence level is really important going forward. What we've seen is in 2024, we still only had 3.9 million people using PrEP. Most of that's oral PrEP, but what could have happened to make those numbers get much closer is what we need to be thinking about as we're rolling out lenacapavir, excuse me. So things like stigmatization that occurred with some of the demand creation for oral PrEP. We need to keep that in mind with lenacapavir, and that's why we're saying focus more on geography and then come back and focus on your key populations. The second is demand creation, making sure people understand this is a great option for people at high risk, and I'll come back to some of those characteristics in my last slide, but thinking about that demand creation, doing it very carefully with the communities of people impacted. So bringing in adolescent girls and young women in the Uganda case, bringing in key populations to make sure that demand creation is appropriate and targeted correctly. And then finally, making sure the provider training is appropriate. So now let's think through what this means for PrEP targets and using this sliding scale. So we want to use HIV incidence within subpopulations and subgeographic areas and using their size estimates to predict what is needed for PrEP. And so this is a complex graph, so I'll take you through it slowly, but if you think about HIV incidence here on the left-hand side, and as incidence goes up, your reach and the coverage you hope to achieve with your PrEP should go up as well. So let's think this through. For example, for young people and adults, if you have an incidence rate of 2%, you'd want to have 80% of those young people and adults in that region, in that area, receiving PrEP. Now, 2% is very rare. We don't see that in most countries. We're seeing a lot more lower than that, 1%, 0.5%. If you have incidence below 0.2%, it's suggesting that you don't necessarily need to push PrEP. You have it as an option, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a major push in terms of a target. However, that's different than for key populations. And so again, if you have a 2% incidence in your sex workers or men who have sex with men or transgender women, you want to be getting towards 80% coverage. When that incidence is lower, you'd go down in terms of your coverage levels here, as you'd see on the sliding scale. It's a little bit different for people who inject drugs in that in many countries, that population is also using safe injecting equipment, and so there's no reason to push the PrEP higher there. One of the considerations we're taking is to consider a minimum threshold of about 5 people on PrEP for every estimated new infection. So in a country like Uganda, where there's about 37,000 new infections a year, that would get you up to about 185,000 people on PrEP, which is a major achievement, would require a major rollout, but thinking through carefully where you're focusing, which populations will be important for that process. There are a number of tools that exist to help focus the targets based on geographic location, sex, and age group. In addition, behavior can be layered on to top of some of this geographic data here. This is a picture from Zambia, but it's showing the Naomi model estimates of HIV incidence. In this case, we've got it for both sexes for 15 to 49, but you can change the age and sex here. And this is produced annually to understand where the high incidence regions are within a country so that you can focus those services based on the populations in that region. We also have a tool, as I mentioned before, within Spectrum that will help you just identify and calculate the denominator. So how many people need different prevention services? You can then put this into a table by population group. And for each of the prevention options, again, making sure that you've got a full method mix, including injectable PrEP, long-acting PrEP, within a bigger picture of what's needed. In conclusion, I think there's some important considerations for targeting going forward. Obviously, prioritization will be critical. Focusing promotion or demand creation, as well as the service delivery in the districts with high HIV incidence will be the first step. Now you can look at HIV incidence, or you can look at the numbers of new infections. That Naomi model has the option to show either of those. In some cases, you might want to focus on the districts with higher counts instead of the higher incidence because it will be more impactful. So take that into consideration. You also want to focus on services. So where there is a clinic or where there is a services that's frequented by people who could benefit the most from lenacapavir, those clinics should also be considered. That UNAIDS modeling that I've mentioned already should be used to help identify these areas and populations. But do not restrict lenacapavir provision, especially among those who request it. Those folks will know best what their risks are. Who will benefit the most from lenacapavir are people who struggle with effective use of oral PrEP, people requiring discretion of pill taking, mobile populations that are difficult to reach with monthly pill refills, people who cannot manage to get to the clinic easily, and of course people with unstable housing. Consider targets for lenacapavir within a set of comprehensive prevention options, as I started this presentation with. Offer choices including oral PrEP, PEP, condoms, needle and syringe programs, opioid agonist and maintenance treatment as appropriate for your country. Thank you.